Can everyone hear me? Awesome. All right, so I will be talking to you all today about expressive range characterization of open text to audio models. I worked on this paper with Azadeh and Naderi, Swen, Gaudl, Mark Cartwright, Amy Hoover, and Mark Nelson from these lovely universities. So let's first start off with what is a text to audio model? So a text to audio model takes in a text prompt input and outputs an audio clip. It's very similar to text to image models such as DALL-E. An example of this is let's put in a cat meowing plaintively into a text to audio model, and this is what it generates. Bit feisty, but that's a 10-second clip of that. And there's a growing interest for text to audio models, especially with games, because you can have stuff such as sound effects, ambience, music. Now, 1 second. There we go. Now, all of what I just said constitutes audio. Audio is so vast, it constitutes me talking to you right now. It constitutes the heater that occasionally turns off and on, and you can hear in the background. Constitutes jazz music, which we could use for like the coffee breaks. There's a lot that goes into the audio space, and we kind of hypothesize that no single model can cover all of these parts equally well. And to do that, we're going to have a little experiment. Let's explore audio variation together. All right, so I'm going to prompt you guys with a little prompt, and you guys are going to just out loud kind of give me the audio that you think of and come up with. I'm going to play a 10-second timer, and in that 10-second clip, you guys will make the audio. So your task is to come up with dog barking sound. Everyone picturing what they're going to come up with? All right, ready? As you can see, there's a lot of variation just in that small little test, right? Maybe you guys thought about a certain dog breed to go after, a certain cadence. You had to think about, did you want to use the full 10-second clip? Did you want to be loud? Did you want to be quiet? And that's kind of the basis of our experiment, right? Is exploring how these audio models approach this and determine their variation. So our motivating example is the word thunder. So we prompted thunder to 2 open source text to audio models, Stable Audio Open and Audio. And these are what they generated. These are spectrograms, which show frequency over time. They are a 10-second clip. The top row is Stable Audio Open. The bottom row is Audio. So let's just start with an example of Stable Audio Open. That's one example, and then here's another. Kind of emphasizing a singular thunderbolt, and here's Audio's approach to the word thunder. I don't know if you could quite hear it, but Audio adds rain to the mixture when it interprets thunder. It kind of interprets thunder at more like in an ambient setting as it moves from a singular thunderbolt to more like rolling thunder, and it incorporates the rain. And you can see that with the spectrogram, how in Stable Audio Open, it had like the singular thunderbolt as a peak. And then in Audio, you kind of have this consistent frequency across the entire audio clip because it introduces that rain as well as makes it more rolling thunder. And you can kind of see that again here. So to be able to analyze the variation of the audio space for these models, we're going to be using expressive range analysis. ERA has popped up several times during this conference already. I'd just like to emphasize that it's used to show the distribution of a generator's output on several chosen quantitative characteristics, usually 2 at a time. Here is an example from Seth Cooper's team about an ERA for Mario. With one axis being difficulty of the level and another axis being the density of like physical Mario blocks. And you can see the ERA mapping here. And what's interesting is the space in the top right corner and how it's not really modeled at all within density or difficulty. And that's kind of our approach as well. Is like we're interested in seeing how these audio spaces are mapped. Like where is there vacant space and where is there heavily modeled space? So let's take our motivating example and let's work it down to an ERA. So the first problem is a spectrogram has a lot of information, so we need to be able to reduce the dimensions a bit. And to do that, we chose RMS loudness against time. And from here, we kind of wanted to think about what's a defining characteristic of thunder. And from what we could hear in the examples, what we chose was like, we like that thunderclap, right? We want to kind of choose that as our defining characteristic of like, what is a thunder audio clip? So to do that, we take from RMS loudness, we chose the peak of RMS loudness as like that singular thunderclap point in time, as well as its position across the 10-second audio clip. And we use that to generate an expressive range analysis for thunder. And that is what this looks like. The red data points are stable audio, and the blue data points are audio. And here you can kind of see from the expressive range analysis, you can see what we were hearing with the spectrogram examples, in that stable audio kind of has an early thunderclap, very high magnitude, and it kind of fizzles out throughout the rest of the clip. Whereas audio is consistent across the 10 seconds in its relative magnitude of the thunderclap. So with this, we were able to kind of treat text-to-audio models with expressive range analysis using a fixed prompt and a model, and that together forms a generator. This will be kind of the basis of our experiment, and we're going to filter out prompt engineering from its influences on variation. And the idea is we're going to generate some number of samples. We're going to choose expressive range characteristics, and then we're just going to plot that and see how the ERA looks like. But we want to move just beyond the word thunder. And to do that, we look towards the ESC50 dataset, which is a data set of environmental sound classification. It has 50 labels under certain categories, kind of like the examples here, crying baby, dog, door knock. What's nice about this is it provides a hand-curated audio samples that we can use as a baseline. So our experiment is using the fixed prompt sound of label, where label is one of the ESC50 labels, such as sound of can opening. We will be using 3 models, stable audio open, audio, and audio LDM2. And then we're going to generate 100 audio clips per label, per model, giving us a total of about 15,000 generated clips. Now, with thunder, we kind of analyze what we would like to see out of a thunder audio clip with the, the peak of the thunderclap. But you can't exactly apply that to all audio labels. Like we don't really want to hear like dog barking peaks. And so we need to be able to generalize this. And to do that, we look towards acoustic features, specifically loudness, pitch, and timbre. And we calculated the first and second order differences of each attribute, giving us a high dimensional vector per audio clip. Now, that is a lot of dimensions to be able to analyze, and we need specifically 2 for expressive range analysis. So in order to reduce it, we use principal component analysis, PCA, to be able to determine 2 dimensions that we can plot for ERA. PCA will find the 2 dimensions that capture the most variation of the data. And going forward, it's important to note that the axes you will see on the ERA no longer have implicit meaning like RMS loudness or time. It is simply the PCA components. And what's more important is the relative position and spread of the data points. So here's one of our first results was crying baby. These are the 3 expressive range analysis for loudness, pitch, and timbre. So let's start with loudness, right? Here you can see that, let me start with red data points are the baseline ESC50 data set. Blue data points are stable audio. Purple are audio LDM2, and green are audio. And with here, you can see that stable audio is a bit more sparse compared to audio and audio LDM2. Audio LDM2 and audio also overlap in the same space. If we want to look to the pitch PCA, it's really interesting here to see how from the baseline to the 3 models that they all overlay in kind of this like linear fashion. And this is pretty consistent across all of our results. And we hypothesized that pitch kind of has a small effect on variation, in that pitch can either be up or pitch can either be down, and that's why it's kind of clustered and linear. And then for the timbre PCA, once again, you can see that audio and audio LDM2 are more clustered and a bit more overlapping with each other, whereas stable audio is a bit more spread out. Here's another example of the label helicopter. I'm going to play you three results, one from each model, so you can kind of just hear the variation as we go over some of the results. So this is stable audio open. This is MM audio. This is audio LDM2. Now for the results, their loudness PCA is actually really interesting because once again, MM audio and audio LDM2 are both concentrated a lot more than stable audio, but in this case, they're not overlapping and they're in completely two different spots of the audio space, as well as none of the models really overlay with the baseline data set. Then for pitch and timbre, it's much like we saw for Crying Baby. And here's a last example result for the label Rain. Once again, you can kind of see the same characteristic motifs from the three examples. Pitch is pretty interesting here because we have been saying that they've been pretty concentrated and a bit linear, and here stable audio is completely sparse and taking up a lot of the space that none of the other models or the baseline is taking up. So when we put it all together, we normalized to the ESC50 dataset, and we discovered that stable audio actually has more variance than the baseline dataset. And then MM audio and audio LDM2 have less variance than the baseline, as well as audio LDM2 had the least amount of variation. It's important to note here that variation doesn't necessarily equate to quality, as you may have seen from like the helicopter generations. So we were able to use expressive range analysis to quantify variation in the output of text-to-audio models on fixed prompts. We also demonstrated two expressive range approaches, one being determining what characteristics we would like to see, which is what we did with our motivating example with Thunder, and then plotting the ERA based off of that. And then we also approached it from a more generalized perspective, applying to multiple different types of labels with the PCA and acoustic features. Now, putting it all together, what this gave us is a foundation to explore multiple avenues of future work. The first is kind of determining how prompts affect variation. So moving beyond just a fixed prompt to a more varied prompt and determining how that affects the varied audio space. The next one is kind of exploring that relationship between quality and variation. How do these two components interact with each other? Is there a trade-off between the two? Just being able to analyze the fidelity in relation to what's being generated. And lastly, we're kind of looking towards audio model evaluation metrics, being able to create quantitative metrics to assert that a model is good at, like, you're good at music, or this model is good at sound effects. And we think that will be able to help maybe like game designers in choosing or utilizing these audio models and being able to look at some metrics and analyze for themselves, like, will this model do maybe what I want it to do, or maybe can I use this model to explore something, rather than just having to experiment on their own first and determine what's good or bad. And then here is the QR code to our paper. The paper has an appendix of all of our expressive range graphs, as well as a link to an audio repository of all the generated clips. Thank you.
I was actually going to ask for a round of whoops, but yeah, question.
So you mentioned that you can be all over the space in terms of the features, or rather the principal components of the features that you're analyzing, but that it may not necessarily have any relationship to like quality or whether it sounds like the thing that it's emulating. I'm wondering, presumably there exists some sort of model that's a classifier for like sound, or you can train it. Basically, there's got to be a way to measure quality. And I just wondering do you know if that exists, and how you might incorporate that in here if you had access to it? Presumably you could like partition space for like, here's the space of things that sound certain ways, but only suddenly the region actually sounds like the maybe.
Yeah, I think that's part of our future work is looking towards being able to categorize that space. But one thing with like identifying quality is like, even right now, it's like, what does quality mean?
Well, that's why I was saying a classifier could do it. Like if a classifier said this actually is a helicopter. Now, like whether it's the kind of helicopter sound you want, that's where it's a question of like, is it, you know, louder, this pitch, this tone, or whatever.
Yeah.
But like the very least, you want it to be a helicopter sound.
Yeah, I think that would be something that, you know, someone else would need to generate, because even in this point in time, what we were looking at is like quality tends to be defined by human, you know, human metrics, human listening to it, and it's not, you know, something that's widely accessible, widely applicable. So that would need to be like its own separate, you know, exploratory space. But for us, what we could potentially do in future work is like break down that that audio space that we saw and kind of identify from there what is quality and what is not quality. I think a good example of that is like you can kind of see in rain. Imagining that this was thunder, it's like the clustering of like audio and audio LDM2 potentially could relate to how like thunder had that rain consistently throughout the 5 versus stable audio was a bit different. So you can kind of assess from there like quality and variation.
Thank you for your talk. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but I noticed that all the audio clips were 10 seconds long.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if that's like a restriction that you place on it.
Yes.
And if so, why? And how does the length change how the
So this is actually a bit of work that I did way before this. It's just kind of experimenting with text to audio models. I believe I used Stable Audio 2, which is not free. And it kind of had a restriction on like tokens. So you could like use like 10 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes and it would cut you off. So back when I was working with that, I used 10 seconds. And then when we folded this into this experiment, we kind of just kept it as a parameter that can make it consistent, as well as it provides like, it's like a small snapshot that provides enough information without like being too little information.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So thank you for the talk. I have two very short qualified questions that will affect my rating. What are these axes?
These?
Yeah.
These are the PCA component. So one axis is PCA1, another axis is PCA2. We don't actually know what those components are. We just understand them to be the components that have the most, that define the most variation within that.
Okay. And when you list this loudness as like A something R A loudness, what is that?
Yeah, that's just RMS loudness, which is just what we were taking as our acoustic feature. So from like the spectrogram had frequency against time, we reduced frequency down to RMS loudness over time.
But what is that?
Yes.
The main reason why I'm asking is we receive, you have like raw loudness with decibels, and then frequency affects perceived loudness. And I'm wondering if that at all factor into.
Yes, for the PCA one, it uses 8-weighted loudness, which is another.
All right, one last question. While you're asking that, if I can speak to EQ, if you want to come down and set up. But yeah.
Yeah, this is short. So, right now, by the way, I think this is very interesting. I just want to ask, to qualify. So, in the audio LDM to helicopter example, in the audio thunder example, or thunder example, there was crackling in the audio. Is that into our system, or is that into the actual?
That is the actual audio clip.
Interesting.
Yes, right. And that's also kind of what we're like talking about with like variation and quality is like, you know, to us, that doesn't sound great, right? Having that distortion in the clipping. And that is just an inherent feature of that generation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's thank Jonathan a few bars.